Today I'm speaking with Chip Diggins. Chip, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
And this is the first interview I have ever done so far with a family member. Chip is my cousin, so it's really cool to broach that barrier. I do have several other family members on the other side of the family that are also atheists that I'm looking forward to interview at some point. But this is really cool to touch base with you. Chip lives in Boulder, Colorado, and you've pretty much lived mostly there in Houston. Is that right?
Lived here, Houston, and a little bit in England.
Oh, well, that's right. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you remember what it was like living in England?
I do remember. I was young, but I do have little vague memories of a train that used to go behind our house, and I got my first stitches in the back of my head. So, yeah, I have some memories.
I remember a story being told of, in England, the word for penny is p.
It's Pete.
And that you had wanted to, at one point when you came back to the States, you'd wanted to go on one of those little horsey rides or whatever that's outside of the Kmart or Target or whatever. And
Yeah,
that you started saying to your mom, I want to pee, I want to pee. And I guess she didn't have the money.
she
and,
didn't. Yeah,
and other people who were watching might have thought you were trying to say you actually had to go to the potty. So it's
yeah.
really
They thought
funny.
my mom was denying me the bathroom, so she looked like a bad mother because of that. But no, I just wanted a penny so I could
Yeah,
ride the horse.
that's awesome.
Yeah,
Well, you work for a oil company, is that correct?
I work for an oil company. Yeah.
And what do you do for
And
them?
I'm a geophysical technician, statics analyst. There's a lot that goes kind of into that title, but it's not as complicated as it sounds, I guess.
Hmm.
It's very basic. I find oil. I help the company, and I find oil.
That's awesome.
It's basically what I do.
It sounds complicated. It sounds very technical.
It can be, but it's once you get used to it, it's pretty simple.
Yeah. Well, I've been to Boulder a couple times, and I specifically remember a time when I was growing up. Came through and visited, and spent a while there. Went down Pearl Street and everything. What's
Yeah.
Boulder like for anyone that's never visited?
Boulder is it's an educated city. It's very healthy. A lot of runners, a lot of bikers, just outdoors. So if you enjoy the outdoors, Boulder is a great place to come. Um, there is, some semblance of religion and people here, but it's liberal, I want to say, and it's it's it was a great place to grow up because I have a lot of friends from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different cultures are here. So you got to meet a lot of different people from all over the world, and that's
That's
the best
awesome.
thing I can say about Boulder.
Hmm, that's awesome. And it's elevated too, right? So it's higher, so it's a little bit harder if you're not used to that. But once you're used to it, like if you're exercising there, it's easier to go from Boulder down to a lower elevation, right?
Yeah, it is, and you got the mountains too right here. So you go from one elevation to an even higher elevation, and you can go from sunny and 90 degrees to going up in the mountains to snowing and going skiing.
Hmm.
So you get two different dynamics there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It
Yeah.
sounds like I've got some friends from Lebanon who said the same thing. They said they can literally go swimming and they can see the snow-capped mountains and they can go drive there and be skiing by that afternoon. It's pretty interesting that those
Yeah,
mixtures like that so close.
that's pretty much what it's like here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, basically the reason and Chip and I have not been as connected as I would love to be, and we're certainly going to stay more connected, I'm sure, from this point. But we wanted to connect because we obviously both have a passion for what this channel is all about, which is promoting people being free to make their own decisions about what they believe, to not be pressured into believing something or you're going to burn in hell, to have the full scope of facts about the origins of Christianity, about science, about all these things put on the table, and for people to just have the freedom to make their own choices without any kind of pressure. So that's part of what we're going to go through. But Chip does bring a little bit of a different perspective because you didn't really grow up in a theistic worldview perspective, for pretty much. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I was never taken under a religion or believed in any kind of religion growing up. I was very secular, growing up with science and education as my teachers, as well as my mom and dad,
Hmm.
obviously. But yeah.
When you look back at your childhood, do you remember any instances where there was some religious infusion happening, where either somebody, you went to a birthday party, for a friend, and somebody, they're about to serve a meal and they prayed, and before they started, or someone that would give you a little tract, like a little piece of paper that talked about something biblical, or just any
Yeah.
kind of church exposure you had? Do you remember anything?
I mean, there was times, with the family, with your side of the family too, and my dad's side, we got a lot of that growing up. We'd go out and visit you guys, or we go and visit my dad's parents, and we'd go to church, and we'd go to Easter and do Christmas and do all the stuff at church. But it was more like, at the time, I didn't understand what was going on. I kind of just put on the Christian mask and pretended to act like a Christian for a couple days and not say, like, oh my God, or cuss or swear, or use like damn or crap. And, you had to watch yourself, and you had to be respectful. And that's all I remember having to do, is really watch my tongue, because I used to say, oh my God, all the time.
Hmm.
So I always used to get kicked under the table and stuff when I was around family. By my mom, she used to kick me. Don't say that. Don't say that. So those were kind of like me putting on. There's more times of me just putting on a mask and trying to be someone I wasn't. To blend in with the family, to make my mom not embarrassed, or my family embarrassed, or embarrassed in any way. So, but no friends, no really anyone that was religious growing up around me. I never did anything in a church, or followed a friend and he tried to, convert me or anything. It's very secular around here. No one pushes their religion. If you are Christian, you believe in evolution. So there is a very different kind of dynamic out here when it comes to religion. It's very secular. If you want to be more religious and take it, more seriously, you move out east of Colorado, and that's where you find a lot more religious people. But here it's very, very secular,
Hmm.
I would say.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
I remember conversations my dad would have with your dad. My dad is passed now, but he would talk about evolution and the dinosaurs and all that, and try to say, well, it's the Earth is only 6 to 10,000 years old, so the
yeah,
dinosaurs must be something wrong with the dating method. It's kind of funny how all that works.
gotta be.
I know that looking back on that, I obviously kind of cringe at some of the conversations that must have been had. I was too young to hear them all and understand them all, but I know that there's definitely, even beyond our families, you get the sense that that's what fundamentalists do. Fundamentalists go to
Yeah.
the people that aren't in line with them and basically shun them or make fun of them, ostracize them, and try to make them basically out to be bad people, even though they're wonderful people. And I always remembered, um, just for a quick example here, I always remember hearing that your dad, as much as he was not a believer, was just one of the best dads ever. And I remember hearing that multiple times growing up, that your dad was just such a loving, caring,
Really?
involved father. And it
Oh,
stood out to me because, I knew a lot of Christian dads that were kind of scummy, didn't really care, and they were kind of mean. And I was like, does this make sense? Like, how does a guy who does not bow his knee to Jesus, obviously, and to the gospel and the cross and all that, how does he end up being a much better dad than these Christian dads that are, some of whom are pastors and stuff? And it always stood out to me as just such an interesting paradox. And of course, I didn't put the pieces together later. The issue of, well, you don't get your morality from the Bible. You might think you do, but you don't. You can be an absolutely amazing person without
hmm.
a pretend God in your worldview. And did that ever strike you too?
Well, I mean, from a different kind of perspective, yeah, because growing up, I did notice how loving my dad was. I did notice how much he cared, and he was always there for us. He let us do whatever we wanted. If we wanted to try something abstract, if we want to try something new, he was always willing to give us a shot and see if we enjoyed it. So
Mhm.
he's always, I can always remember him being at all my soccer, baseball, hockey games. Just he was just always there, and not just mine, but my sisters. I have two older sisters as well, and he was at their softball or their soccer games. He just made time for all of us, but he also made time for his work, and he took us from Houston to Colorado to England with his work, and we were all along for the ride, but happy to be along on the ride because he was so nourishing and caring. And so was my mom. My mom's not, much different from my father in a lot of ways when it comes to how they treated us and gave us the freedom to do what we wanted and think what we wanted. if we went down the religious route, then we went down the religious route. You know, it wasn't anything that he would tell us not to do or tell us that we're being stupid or bad or put us down. Or we never got put down. We always got, you know, boosted up. Is the way I'd say with my dad. It was never, there's never anything that he would put us down for. It was always trying to boost us and make us the best versions of ourselves. And it was really helpful because he's a man of science. He's a geophysicist. So he knew science, and he knew how to teach science, and he knew how to teach math, and he knew how to make it fun for you as a kid, not so boring. So where other kids were getting pissed off at math and science classes, my dad was making it fun and making it interesting for us. So I'll always be grateful for my dad. And yeah, he was definitely different from other dads that, you know, I knew and stuff, because he was just, yeah, he didn't follow in religion or anything. But I remember hearing, you know, somebody talk about my dad negatively, and it affected me back when I was like 7 or 8. Heard someone just saying mean things about my dad, that, you know, he's gone off a path that no one should follow and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, I've heard some negative things.
Religious?
Yeah, it was from a religious person.
Yeah.
So that was like, yeah, that was one of those things where I didn't understand it at the time, but when I got older, I understood what they were referring to, saying that he was someone that shouldn't be followed, and that he's gone off a path that no one should follow. And I didn't understand what it meant then. I knew they were saying he was a bad person, but I didn't realize they were saying it's because he wasn't religious and followed some sort of Christian doctrine, you know, that they did. Yeah.
And his background from his family was more Catholic, is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
So that's like, I don't know so much about my dad's family and history with religion, because actually a lot of them aren't that religious. Like, I know he's got a brother who is, but his 4 sisters, yeah, I mean, a couple of them are, but the other ones are pretty secular. And so, yeah, he was raised Catholic. I believe that's true.
Yeah. And then on my side, all Protestant, Baptistic. That's interesting. Well, when you and I would just do that. Your dad, obviously, he's the kind of guy that he had a sparkle in his eye all the time when he'd explain something. You could just see he just glowed with excitement. He's a great guy, and
he's good at explaining.
Yeah, I hope to connect with him again. I had a geometry teacher like that. He would do the theorems and all that and proofs, and he would do it. It'd take 5 minutes to show you, and he'd get done, and he'd turn around from the blackboard, and his eyes were just sparkling like, did you guys see what I did? It was, I always remember that. Your dad is very similar.
It makes it really easy to learn when you got an enthusiastic teacher.
Yeah.
You know, he's got passion just leaking through him. So, yeah.
When you look at religion, whether it's a Catholic or Protestant religion, what do you feel like you know about what they're trying to say, coming from a perspective where this wasn't drilled into your head that you have to believe, or you're going to burn in hell or go to purgatory or something? But from what you do understand, what would you say is your understanding of the Christian message? If you were to sit down, what do you expect them to say you need to think about and believe?
That's actually a good question, because I feel like I know kind of a good answer, or like a simple answer, and can answer it quickly. But, you know, I guess we can go into more details, but as a simple answer, it's accepting the resurrection of Jesus, and that he is the Son of God of the Holy Trinity, and that prayer works. I know that Jesus is basically the Son of God, really, like simplest terms, and that, you know, if you look for salvation, you can get it through Jesus, basically.
Yeah.
You know,
so that's a simple gospel for sure. That's good.
Yeah.
I would just add to it for anyone that doesn't follow my channel, that doesn't know what we're talking about. Just take a minute or two here. The gospel, especially from a Protestant perspective, is the idea that you start first with the bad news, which is that you are condemned before God because God has said you stand as in the lineage of Adam, and Adam sinned, and he's kind of like your representative before God. So you just the fact that you're born, you are in Adam. You are judicially declared unrighteous or unholy or sinner before God, just because the fact that you're born as a human. But then on top of that, of course, you also add on to it things that you do, your own sins. You talk back to your mom, you stole, whatever you thought, a bad thought. And then, of course, things that you didn't do, what they call sins of omission. You failed to obey God. You failed to heed his word. You failed to do everything for his glory. So you got all this sin stuff going on. You inherited it. You did it. The other things you didn't do, you're, in a word, you're messed up. You're broken. You're certainly unworthy. You don't deserve heaven. You don't deserve to be having peace with God. So that's where the gospel kind of starts, where you're in a bad spot. And then the gospel would be for a Christian that what happens is that Christ literally takes your punishment, that you as a sinner deserve to be punished, and that when Christ died on the cross, what he was doing was literally taking the punishment in your place. He is your replacement. He's your perfect spotless lamb, that instead of you getting slain, he gets slain, and his blood has the power to literally take away your sins. His violent death was the violent death that you and I should have received for all eternity in hell. He gets it instead on the cross. And then, of course, as you said, the resurrection, proving that he has power over death. He conquered sin and death, and he proved it because he didn't stay dead. That that offer, where someone says, "Hey, will you, number one, acknowledge you're a sinner? You got a big problem, and if you die in your sins, you're going to go burn in hell, or if you're not, into that, you're going to be at least in purgatory or some kind of annihilation. You're not going to heaven with a sin problem." And then the other part would be, do you acknowledge that, God has given you this wonderful free gift? And he's even said, I don't want you to work for it. I don't want you to go to church 3 times a week and go do penance and go do confession. I want you to simply accept my free gift. I gave you Jesus, his death and resurrection. Will you accept that sacrifice in your behalf? And for those people, according to the Bible, who do, if you accept Jesus as your Savior, then you're declared righteous before God. That has a lot we could unpack here, and I don't know if we want to spend too much time on it, but I do just want to ask, what is your response when you hear someone say to you, number one, Chip, you're a horrible sinner that deserves death. Number two, God couldn't just forgive you. He couldn't say, Chip, I just forgive you. You messed up, but I forgive you. He says you deserve horrible punishment that from a Protestant perspective, it goes on forever, eternal conscious torment. And then on top of that, he says, but I have provided a way. I'm going to kill my son, who is me. I'm going to kill myself to appease myself because of a problem that I created in the first place, creating you flawed in the garden, putting the enemy of your souls in the garden, the serpent. I create this problem, so I'm going to kill myself to appease myself, and I'm going to do it through blood magic. And all you have to do is believe. That's the gospel to people. Obviously I'm putting in a little bit of a sarcastic tone there, but what do you think of when you hear people present to you the message and what you have to do? Otherwise, you're basically on the way to a very, very sad eternity.
Well, I mean, I think from a secular perspective, obviously that sounds insane. It sounds crazy. It's hard for me to even fathom believing something like that. I don't know what would have to happen for me to believe something like that. I'm sure it would have been something, easy in my childhood, a little switch for me to start believing something like that. But as an adult now, hearing something like that, it's really insane, because I have no belief that that's true at all. I think that's so far from anything being true that it's sad for me to hear that, because I know people believe that, and I want everyone to be on the same page. And when I hear something like that, I think that's way, way off the page. That's, we're not even on the same page anymore. So the conversation is going to be hard to have. So, but yeah, I think it's sad. Really, it's just sad and hard to hear, because it's not something that I believe. And I really would like evidence and proof of all this stuff, So, because if it is true, my soul's on the line, there's salvation for it. I would like proof that, there is a soul, that Jesus really did come back and he died for our sins, and he's, can give us an afterlife. And that if I don't believe in this, I am going to go spend an eternity in hell. I would love to know that all for sure and have evidence of that. If that is true, then I find that to be important, right? If that's true, that is very important, and it should be important to me and everyone, because your soul and your salvation is on the line. But I don't have any reason to believe that it's true, and I don't think anyone else does either.
Yeah.
For that. But yeah, I think it's so far from anything that I've ever learned to be true or know to be true about the universe and how it works. And yeah, I can't even begin to comprehend what it would take for me to even go down that path as of right now.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a good point, and that is if it is true, I need proof, but maybe even a slight step earlier is like, if it is true, where did you get this from? Like, how do you know this? Like, where is this message coming from? And that's kind of predicated on this idea that the Bible is the book from God that he sent to people, ironically, pretty much always or nearly always to men. The women, for whatever reason, just weren't in the hearing from God club, apart from Deborah, the judge Deborah and Judges, and Mary, certainly with the Magnificat and Luke, and a few other random spots. But mostly it was men. Men 99% of the time are the ones getting this message from God. And ironically, always men, like, this huge planet, and God's only speaking to men in one little dot geographically, one little teeny circle, always. He doesn't go to the Chinese and tell them. He doesn't go to the tribes in South America. He doesn't go to the, people in the far reaches of Mongolia. He goes to one little tribe in the Middle East and says, I'm only going to speak to you.
Yeah.
Did you ever get into, like, just asking people or thinking through, where did you get this book from? Like, what? Because other people have books too. Like, there's the Quran, there's the Bhagavad Gita, there's all these other books. What makes your Bible so special, and how do you know that it's from God? Did you ever wonder about that?
Sure. I mean, I did. I still wonder about it every once in a while. I like taking a look at religions and looking at the Quran and comparing that with Christianity and seeing where it separates and where it still is kind of the same message together. I like to compare and contrast religions, but for the most part, no. I mean, I never really thought about the Bible all that much growing up. I never even cared for that message. It was never presented to me as something that was fact. So I don't know. It's I guess I have a different childhood than a lot of people, because I was so ingrained in science and just schoolwork and doing other things, and even thinking about something like that or talking about it. It was so far away from my normal everyday activities,
Did you have any friends who were really religious or Christian?
Not really that I can remember. It was, I mean, I'm sure there were, but there was no overlap from their religion into my life. It was, I went to school with them, and maybe, I went over to their house and there was some sort of Jesus statue, or maybe there was the Mother Mary or something like that on the wall or as a decoration, but nothing that made me go, wow, what's that? Tell me more. What is this? And they start telling me, and I go, oh, who's Jesus? What does Jesus want? I never went down or had those conversations, not even with my dad, asking him, what is Jesus? What does God want from us? If this is a book that's supposedly true, why don't you believe it, Dad? I never really asked that question.
So did no one ever evangelize or proselytize, try to get you to hear their core message?
Just your dad.
Just my dad?
It was just your dad, yeah. I mean, I remember being out at dinner. I can't remember when it was, but I think it was for a funeral. We came out, and we went out to dinner with you. Well, I wasn't with necessarily, I don't think it was with you, but it was with like your brother and your dad and your mom. And everywhere we went, your dad was trying to convert people. Have you heard a word of Jesus? And he'd hand them a Bible. Like, even before the waitress said hello, like, have you heard about Jesus? And he'd hand her like this little Bible and stuff and start talking to her about it. I mean, so, my dad would just, stay quiet, don't say anything, don't, to ask him what he's doing and stuff, and just don't open up the conversation, because he'll talk to you about it. So, I mean, that was the most evangelizing I saw, was from your side of the family.
That's exactly what he would do. There was a grocery store not too far from our house growing up that he would go to, and we would we would see like he would go grocery shopping, like maybe 30% of the rationale was to get groceries. 70% of the rationale was to just give out tracts and to tell
Yeah,
everybody, hey, can I give you something to read? Can I give you something to read? So it's fascinating that you remember some of that too. It was very
yeah.
much a predominant, overwhelming, overarching dynamic that we had growing up. When we talk about the Bible, one thing I like to add, and I'll keep this brief because this isn't the main part of our reason for talking today, but I do like to just bring up for anyone that happens to stumble on my channel, and this is like a one-off where you really don't know me, you don't watch my stuff, and you're not necessarily going to come back. I do like to add just a little bit of information about the Bible because I think it's the crux of the matter, and this is where it begins to get into my story. And this, we're not going to take too much time on my story, but just to give a really brief overview first of my story. I was a Christian for 43 years, went to Bible college to be a pastor, mission school to be a missionary. I wanted to do jungle tribal evangelism for people that didn't have a language yet, or have an alphabet where they had a verbal language but no written alphabet. So they didn't have any books yet. So you would go to the tribe and learn their language, learn their culture, help them develop an alphabet, and then, of course, translate the Bible into their new language, into their new alphabet, and then, of course, preach it and hope that they would come to Christ. I memorized whole books of the Bible, thousands upon thousands of verses, endless everything, endless sermons, endless devotional books. This was my life, as you can imagine. I mean, you knew my dad when he was alive. You knew enough to know what he was like. And if you can imagine a dad like that, you can imagine a son like me. And so, Saturday mornings, for example, the big thing Saturday morning was these little 3x5 cards with verses, and you'd memorize and go through maybe 100 of them, just one-on-one with him. He'd sit at the end of the table and I'd sit on the side, and I would he would pick up a card and say, Psalm 100, and I would have to do it. And if I didn't say it, correctly, he put it in that pile, like, you got to work on this one, whatever, Psalm 50, 51, this, and I'd have to give that verse. And most of the time, of course, pretty quickly, I would know them all, and I was very good at it. So I'd memorized hundreds of verses before what's called Bible quizzing. Then in Bible quizzing, which was like this event at the Christian school, it added on to thousands more verses. And so this was very real to me in every sense. I mean, this wasn't like I was a casual Christian, and I also was passionate. It wasn't like I just had to do this. I wanted to, because to me it was real. If you would have said, Tim, you're being homeschooled this year, and I want you to go read 30 minutes of a good devotional book, read something that inspires you to love Jesus more. I would have said, okay, if you want me to do it for 30 minutes as part of my homeschool curriculum, then I'm going to do it for 3 or 4 hours, because I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I was required to listen to 30 minutes of a Christian radio. Pick a preacher, pick your favorite preacher. I listened to an hour or two every day voluntarily. I loved this stuff. I loved Jesus. I loved the kingdom and the gospel. And what happened with me was, we're sitting here, as you do as a Christian family, raising your kids to be little soldiers for Jesus, which you do very early. Childhood indoctrination is extremely important. You have to, and of course you wouldn't call it that, but you have to teach them to love Jesus and to love his word. And so we're sitting around doing these songs, and there's a song called Joshua Fought the Battle of Jericho. Have you ever heard of that song?
No, but I know Jericho and Joshua. So
Okay, about them walking around the city.
yeah,
So for anyone that doesn't know the story, that in the Old Testament, they go to the city of Jericho and they say that God's given us this land. People of Jericho basically say, no, of course this is our land. And so God says, I want you to walk around, for 7 days, walk around the city. Don't do anything. Don't attack them. Just for 7 days, walk around. On the seventh day, walk around, I think 7 times, and then blow your trumpets as loud as you can. And as soon as you blow them, the walls will come down, and this is the beginning of your annexing their land that I've given you. And it's funny, that's the song that my brother Josh is named for. Joshua Fought the Battle of Jericho.
Oh, really?
My dad and my mom couldn't figure out a name. They just weren't sure, and so Josh was born. And on the way to the hospital, my dad turned on Christian radio, and they played that song, Joshua Fought the Battle of Jericho. And he came to the hospital and said, I got it. His name's Joshua. That's it. So we're singing this song here, as you do many, many Christian songs for the kids. And we've got 4 kids here under age 7, but at the time there was maybe only, I think, 2 and baby. And as soon as I'd sung this song before many times, but this one particular day, we're singing Joshua fought the battle of Jericho. And I reflected on what comes next in the text. The song is designed to be like a very fun kid song. It's Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. It's kind of fun. It's a jingle.
Yeah.
In the story, number one, you're talking about them going into a land where people have already been living for centuries. And I'm not saying this is true. The history behind this is very convoluted. They mixed some stories up and made a lot of it up, but just the way it's told, literally, they go in and God says, "This land is yours. I'm giving it to you," which equates to land theft. Everyone has had all these houses, these cities. Go in and steal their land. It's yours. But then it says, "I want you to go in and slaughter everybody, little babies, all the animals, the moms and dads, everybody." And then it says, "If you find a young girl who's a virgin, you can keep her alive and take her with you." And that's not just allowed, it's commanded repeatedly in the text of the Old Testament. You see it in the Pentateuch and Joshua. And these commands are obviously, we're talking about genocide, land theft. They include slavery, making slaves of these people. And people say, well, it's just like indentured servitude. No, it says you can beat your slaves until they're almost dead. You can bequeath them to your children as property. And I'm realizing, like, wait a second. I am not teaching my kids genocide, land theft, slavery, and all this stuff, but I'm implying that I'm complicit with this. I'm okay with it because I'm singing the songs of Zion, so to speak. I'm singing these beautiful songs. I'm praising God for doing this action. And it hit me like, what am I doing? Do I really want to teach my kids a genocidal acceptance of a genocidal worldview? And it was the first time I'd ever, and I say this to my shame, Chip, I should have easily said this is a problem a long time ago. But for some reason that day, it hit me. Genocide, slavery, land theft, child brides or worse, all this bad stuff. And I'm like, what am I going to do with this? I can't teach my kids this stuff. And if you would have said to me at that point, Tim, you know where this is leading, right? You're going to deconvert and become an atheist. I would have said there's no way. Yeah. Because number one, I knew that the Bible was God's word. I knew that God was real. And I knew that ultimately I would have answers, in heaven for sure. But even in this, I just needed to study more, understand it better. And at that point, I began an 18-month deep dive into stuff where the rabbit hole just kept getting deeper. I did pick the red pill. And as I dove into it, I discovered stuff that it was like my jaw just kept dropping. And I was like, wait, what? That can't be right. What? And I just want to go through a few of these things real quick. And then we'll get back to the main part of this. But so before I get into that, I'm just going to give a whole list of the bad stuff. Okay. And then we'll go into where the Bible actually came from. So
a whole list?
Not the whole list, but a lot of it.
Okay.
So we talked about the genocide, land theft, the slavery, talks about things like obviously forced eviction, apartheid, certainly a bloodthirstiness that's predominant, making permanent prisoners of war, ethnic cleansing, hate crimes, endless brutality. There's sections that talk about taking hundreds of male foreskins as trophies. There's a prescription for how a priest can administer an abortion to a woman if the man thinks that his wife might have been unfaithful. He has a concoction of, he takes water and puts some dust from the ground of the temple in the water, mixes it, and she drinks it, and if she has been unfaithful, it will abort the baby. Throwing out lepers and unclean women, blaming blindness on sin, offering daughters to be raped and still being called righteous, which happens with a man named Lot. Baking bread over a fire of human excrement, child brides or kidnapping or worse, polygamy, concubines, incest, virginity checks, forced marriages, paying off rape with a few shekels, misogyny, of course, and sexism, killing gay people, stoning, encouraging people to dash the heads of your enemy's babies on the rocks, victim blaming, such as you deserve this because of your sin, all clearly commanded by the Yahweh character. That should have been, to me, enough to say there's a problem. But it wasn't. And again, I say it to my shame. But this is where it gets deeper. When I dove in, I realized there are endless, and I mean endless, references to Aristotelian and Neoplatonistic and Pythagorean and Stoic philosophies woven all throughout this book, the New Testament specifically. Zoroastrian and Egyptian influences are just abundant. It quotes extensively from the Greek pantheon and Mithraic beliefs. Luke and Acts are based heavily on Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, both in structure, detail, and quotes. The Gospels also quote from Euripides and Virgil. The Gospel of Mark is based according to the structure of the zodiac in the right order of the constellations. The author of Luke borrows extensively from Josephus, the Jewish historian. The author of Luke was either Plutarch or heavily aware of Plutarch's writing, extensive copying from Plutarch. The New Testament quotes extensively from the Dead Sea Scrolls, from the Community Rules, the Temple Scroll, the War Scroll, the Song of the Sabbath Sacrifice, etc. It also quotes extensively from other books that are considered like apocryphal, deuterocanonical. The New Testament quotes 100 times from the Book of Enoch. Are you familiar with the Book of Enoch?
Yes, actually. I just had a conversation actually about this the other day.
Well, oh, really? Okay.
I learned things about it the other day, but.
Did they talk about how it's woven into the New Testament?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was on the Atheist Experience, actually, that Matt was talking about this, saying Enoch's not in the Bible, actually, but there's a story of Enoch in the Bible, right? But the Book of Enoch is not actually in the Bible itself, right?
Correct. It is separate. There's a direct reference in the book of Jude, and I think it's 2 Peter from it. But what most people don't realize is that it is woven into the New Testament in that it's quoted 100 times. Okay. And people think they're reading, the Sermon on the Mount. You're reading a quote from Enoch, things like that. It's all over the place. Enoch is probably, if for people that want to really dive into the origins of Christianity, one of the best places to start is read, if you're aware of the New Testament, like if you already know what's in the New Testament, the canonical New Testament, read the Book of Enoch. You will find it will blow your mind. It's like reading the pre-New Testament.
I'm going to read that.
Yeah, it's amazing. There's endless quotes from, see here, the Book of Jasher, the Wisdom of Solomon, Sirach or Ecclesiasticus, Baruch, Esdras, Jubilees, dozens from that. Judith, Tobit, the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, the Assumption of Moses, the Life of Adam and Eve, the Apocalypse of Zephaniah. I mean, read that one, that'll blow your mind. It's quoting dozens, hundreds of times from these other books. And Christians don't even know it. They have no idea where their book came from. There are lots of other quotes from earlier philosophers, such as, again, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates. Gematria, or Jewish numerology and early Kabbalah, is woven in. It's all over. Pythagorean concepts woven in John 21 with the 153 fish. The first couple chapters of Luke, it's all over Revelation. And a lot of people don't realize that there's like 40 different Gospels or more, at least 40 that we know of. And so the question is, well, how do you know these 4 are the right ones? Why did you pick 4? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Number one, we don't even know who wrote them. It wasn't Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have no idea who wrote them. But of those 4 that had a name attributed to them, why those 4 versus the other 40 or 50 or more? There's at least 6 books of Acts. There are at least 9 different endings to the Gospel of Mark. How do we know which one is the correct one? We know that there are forgeries and counter-forgeries all over. If you've read, Bart Ehrman, counter-forgeries all over, including inside the canon. There's extensive astrotheology woven in with, star stories woven in. It goes on, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. But when you look at that, you add in the bad stuff, you add in where it comes from, and you add in issues of church history where you're looking at basically men fighting politically about which book should we get in. Revelation's kicked out for 3 centuries, then it's suddenly brought in. Enoch's in, then suddenly it's out. All these arguments, and and the Ethiopian church, they've never lost Enoch. They've always had Enoch included. It's been there from day one. It's like God is not the author of confusion, it says in the Bible, and yet his canon, his list of books, it is the starting point of his supposed love letter to us, and it's utterly confusing as to which part is human versus which part is divine, both in terms of which books, but even which parts of the books. There's an argument to be made that the first 2 chapters of Luke were not there originally, they were added later. Certainly, the ending of Mark was not there, and it was added later. When you listen to that and you hear this, does it strike you as a little bit weird that Christians aren't nailing down this one main question of, if you're gonna launch into eternity basing it on this, like this is your magic carpet that's going to keep you safe over the flames of hell, the Bible? They don't even know where it came from. Does that strike you as a little bit odd?
Well, yeah, it's like the what the evidence of the first 80 years of Christianity is just not preserved in any way. So what the average lifespan of a person back then was about 50 years. 48 years is about the average lifespan.
Yeah.
So if you have that, and if you have about 80 years of the first century of the Bible just not preserved at all, so it's all word of mouth, and it's all through a human lifetime. Yeah, you don't have any idea of what they were doing and what practices and what their religious beliefs and teachings were in that first part of Christianity. So was the second century the same kind of religion as it was during the first century? We have no idea. So that's one part that always made me unsure and uncertain of why people don't think about that, or you don't hear about it. It gets kind of pushed under the rug in conversation, or just people avoid it, because I think that's a big discrepancy. I mean, to have no religious text and no idea what they were doing in the first century, right? What was the story of Jesus? Was it the same as it is today, or was there other stories about Jesus that we never even knew about, that never got shared with us, that got destroyed, or were they all word of mouth? Was the whole thing word of mouth for the first 80 years? Was it just no one wrote down anything until the second century? So we don't even know how it started, who was part of it, who was writing the first stories about Christ. Was Christ even a part of it in the first century? I mean, there's so much we don't know, and just the fact that it's not preserved seems to works to the benefit, I think, of the religion in some ways. It doesn't, in my perspective, but it just seems like it was like it's convenient, kind of.
Yeah. It's amazing to me what it almost amounts to me is I grew up watching a show called Anne of Green Gables. Do you know that book and show? It's really cute. It's just a redheaded orphan that she just got an amazing imagination, and it's a cool story in itself. But one of the phrases that they use in there is scope for the imagination, like talking about the beauty of having an imagination that can just look at something and see beyond what an average person sees a lake. If you have scope for the imagination, you see the glimmering, shining waters and the beauty of it all. And just like having an old soul, having a poet's mind, eyes to see, and to just the beauty of that kind of mentality. But when I think about it too, like scope for the imagination, I think about what about the imagination for what you're talking about? Like, what if there were different ways that this thing evolved? What if there was a different story about Jesus? What if there were 100 different stories about Jesus, and people just fought and burned books and buried them and killed each other over? And we know they did. We know historically they absolutely killed each other over which version was correct. And so it's almost like, to me, it's like I'd love to paint a picture someday, like I use a PowerPoint someday, but just to use my hands, like if there's all these little circles of the different stories that are going on. This group believes Jesus was just a man. This group believes Jesus was an angel. This group believes Jesus, was married to Mary Magdalene. This group believes Jesus was actually married to both Mary and Magdalene. I'm sorry, Mary and Martha, and all these different versions. And somehow there's like this little string of thread of like, okay, if I take a little bit from this one, a little bit from that one, it weaves into this one little final, what's called orthodoxy. Like this is the Christianity that the Roman Catholic Church and eventually the Protestant Church, accepted as this is the real story. Like there was no way to control or to even understand what predicated them coming to that orthodoxy. And it blows my mind that people have nothing to say but simply, this is from God. Like, how do you know that? And one of the biggest things to me that it blows my mind every time I think about it. And I'm gonna make a shameless plug here for Dennis MacDonald. But this is a book called, sorry, it's got a little sticker on it, Mythologizing Jesus. Sorry, you can't read the whole thing. Dennis MacDonald. I highly recommend. There he is. Sorry, I was trying to cover. I should take the cover off so you can see better. But Dennis MacDonald has written a lot of books on this. It's called Mimesis Criticism, where we're talking about where this stuff comes from, and you get deep into it and you realize that a lot of this stuff is straight out of mythology. And I'm just going to give a real quick list here, like 10 things. But when you look at, and the other one is Midrash. You're familiar with Midrash?
No, I'm not.
Midrash is where they would take a story in the Old Testament, like Jonah and the fish, being in the belly of the fish,
Yeah.
or Joseph and his brothers. They would take a story that everyone knew, and they would rewrite it. They would rewrite this Old Testament story in a different way with different characters and maybe a different outcome. But you can still see it's the same story. You see that extensively, but you also see the same thing with Greek poetry and Greek epics. So, for example, in Book of Acts, Paul's resurrection of someone named Eutychus is based on Odyssey's fate of someone named Elpenor. The visions in Acts of Peter and Cornelius are clearly based on the story of Iliad's Agamemnon. Paul gives a farewell in the Book of Acts at a place called Miletus. It's based on Hector's farewell to Andromache. In the beginning of Acts, there is a lottery to find out who's going to replace Judas, who's just died, killed himself, who's going to be the new disciple, and they end up with Matthias using sticks, like, they draw straws. That's clearly based on the lottery of Ajax. Peter's escape from prison borrows extensive details from Priam's escape from Achilles. You look at things even like the names. You look at, there's a guy, you ever hear the name Zacchaeus? Do you know that story?
I'm not sure. No,
He
I
was
don't
a,
think so.
he was considered in the Gospels a short man. So there was a crowd coming through, and he wanted to see Jesus, and he couldn't because he was too short. So there's a tree, and he climbs up in the tree, and so he can see Jesus. And of course, Jesus, being all-knowing, notices him up there and stops walking through the crowd and focuses right on Zacchaeus and says,
Yeah.
Zacchaeus, you're a tax collector. I want you to repent, stop, extorting people, and give back what you owe to people, and be a righteous man. And of course, it ends that way where Zacchaeus promises to do that and double, and to make things right. Well, Zacchaeus, if I mean, again, this is like, to borrow a biblical phrase, if you have ears to hear, think about it. Euripides has the Bacchae or Bacchaeus. This man is named Zacchaeus. In the Gospels, it talks about a blind man that's healed by Jesus named Bar Timaeus, or son of Timaeus. Plato has the original Timaeus. Plato talks about Timaeus. Jesus has the son of Timaeus. There's all these plays on words that occur. Even it's have you ever read the John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress? Pilgrim's Progress.
The Pilgrim's Progress.
Yeah, Pilgrim is like he's a Christian, but in that story,
Okay.
there's all these people who are named for something, and I forget the actual names. But if you were named, Chip the honest, and I was named, Tim the rich man, and like that was my real name, Tim Richmond, and
Right.
and where they're literally taking a part of your personality and putting it into the name. They're doing that with the gospel stories of Joseph of Arimathea. Well, Arimathea, it just means the best disciple. Joseph, the best disciple, and you have all these little hints. And again, going back to some of the parallels, Gamaliel quotes the Gamaliel character in Acts is quoting Tiresias, again from these Greek epics. Paul and Peter, their stories mirror and quote from the Pentheist stories. So it's like, at what point do you say this stuff, it's not just like it sounds mythological, it's literally borrowing from and mimicking and extensively quoting from existing mythology.
Yeah,
And
other
so,
stories.
yeah, like at what point do you say there's something else going on here?
Yeah, this is just a copy and paste almost of these other stories that are happening. And Jesus was a dying and rising God like so many others, So
Yeah.
he wasn't the only one back then, or the first one. So
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I didn't even talk about that, but yeah, people are afraid of that because they're afraid of parallelomania, but it's like you actually have parallelophobia. There were dying and rising gods who had exact motifs that Jesus copied. And even just like the generic ones of the church, Mithras, when you were following Mithras, what you would do to become part of the Mithraic community is you would get baptized, and then you would go through a ritual meal of bread and wine or bread and beer, and then you would become known as a brother or sister of the community. That's exactly what Christianity did to a T. They just borrowed this stuff. And it's funny that when you look at the church fathers, the early church fathers, they knew a lot of this stuff, And people accuse them and say, you're just copying the other gods that we know. And their response was, you may have heard this before, but just for anyone that hasn't, the response was Satan knew what the church was going to look like and what Jesus was going to do. So he, knowing what was going to happen in history, preempted it by earlier in history, he planted fake religions that would look just like it. So you would get confused when the real thing came along. I mean, they'll go to any length to try to get you to explain away the parallels. It's mind-boggling. Anyway, I know that's a lot of stuff. I'll end there with that part of it. But when you look at this, what do you think when you see Christians that are unwilling to look back and they don't even know where their own story came from, and they won't entertain the conversation?
Well, it's hard for me to believe because it's not. That should be a sign that there's an issue with the belief in itself. If you can't test the claims and you can't put it to the, some rigorous test to make sure that what you're believing is true, if you have to take anything on faith, just in itself is a sign to me that you might want to think about this a little more deeply and do your own research into it, and just not take everyone's word or take the Bible as the word of God right away. Look into everything. I can't even believe, if we had astronomy, but the first 20, 30 years of astronomy it would be a totally different thing, because you could still believe in astronomy, without having that. But this is about God and Jesus telling you what they want and how to reach salvation. So I find it very important. So it's just convenient when it seems like it's so many other myths, so many other things that have come before it. And maybe it's an amalgamation of all of them. Maybe it's little pieces from this one and more from over here. Is it more like Zamaxis, or is it more like Moroni? But you can see little pieces from all over, different cultures, different religions, grow and affect the Christian God, or affect Jesus. And you can tell, just the dying and rising part, like I just brought up, was just done so many other times beforehand. And it seems like he's just this certain section of the world in near Israel. This is what they started believing. And they took, the stories from the Persians all the way go out west. They have all this from the Egyptians, and they kind of just have an amalgamation and that's what it seems like. Whether, I'm not an historian, or I'm not a theologian, so I can't tell you if these are exactly what happened. I just listen to people talk about it, but it seems like it's just, it's just their version of a different story. Or it's the same story, but they made it their own, and they created this Jesus guy, which is like Gabriel, and
they're basically taking the conversations of the day and just kind of Judaizing it. That's what's happening. Is even some of the verbiage, there are mystery cults going on all over these mystery religions, where people would say, if you believe, if you join our little group, we're not going to tell you at first what the real truth is.
Right.
But if you go through the initiation, we'll eventually tell you there's a mystery. When you get into the epistles, Paul talks extensively about, let me tell you about the mysteries that have been hidden from the creation of the world, but I'm going to reveal to you the mysteries. It's exactly the same thing. It's got a Judaistic bent, of course, because it's a Judaized mystery religion. But the dynamics are all there. They're all easy, and they're easy to spot once you start looking. And it's like, if you just have to have the blinders come off for a little bit, the eyes to see. There's a different, it's like if you look at the options, say, this could have been straight from God. Clearly, yes, that's one option. It could have been from God.
Yeah.
But it could have actually evolved from a lot of other different things culturally happening, especially when you realize, we don't even know who wrote this stuff. And we know that fishermen of that day would not have been literate. So how are they writing, these stories? How is Peter, an illiterate fisherman, writing, these Greek works and quoting Enoch extensively? It's like, this doesn't make sense. We don't even know where this came from.
Yeah, so it's like the smartest people, or the most literate people, which was far and few between, but they were the ones that are creating and writing these things down. And there's so much room for them just making it up in the first place, and them just creating stories. And it'd be so easy for people back then to believe these stories, because they're not familiar with science and how the world works, and They didn't know about evolution, germ theory. There's none of this. So they're all looking for answers during this time period of how all this works and what it all means. And the people are dying left and right from all sorts of things. Where are they going? Am I going to see them again? So religion gives answers to a lot of this stuff. So, there's God, and we're all going to see each other again in heaven. And it sounds nice. It sounds beautiful. If you have a good story and you got enough people around you believing it, it's just going to bring more and more people in, and you're safer and stronger and feel more protected as a group of bigger and bigger. If it keeps growing, you get your own kind of group of protectors, and everyone to believe what you believe, and you're all looking out for each other. You call each other brothers and sisters, and it becomes like a family. So I can imagine being back then. If I was, living back then, that would all sound amazing to me, because there's no guy on the corner saying, no, the universe is 14.8 billion years old, and we came from an expansion of space, and there's a germ theory. You need to wash your hands, make sure you get, you cook your meat and all this stuff. There's no one on the corner saying that to everyone. So they have a bunch of death cults saying and telling them what supposedly is the truth of this reality. And the imagination for people that could write and can create these stories, their imagination can take them in all sorts of directions. Like, you have to imagine that someone that's educated in that time period as well, he's read all these other, theologies, and he's learned about Egyptians who didn't know about the Egyptian, religions and things that they believed in. Back then everyone knew, because it transversed that whole area. Everyone was very aware of it. So you can just see them taking that and creating it and making it their own, creating stories and making it about someone that looks like them, that lives in the area where they all live in, because then he can be their Messiah. He can be this God for these people, because this is what they need. They don't need the Egyptian God up here. This is a Jewish area, so they're creating a religion that's similar to Jews, but just away from the church.
Yeah.
So,
And it's when you understand too their cultural milieu of that exact time frame, like these people were desperate for answers as to why their temple had just been destroyed. They certainly did not expect that, and they were Enochian, heavily influenced by the Enochian worldview, which was, they believed, especially the Qumran community, they believed that by being pure, they were about to join the angels in the fight against the Romans and the Greeks, and they were about to take back the land to basically start this huge kingdom. They knew that they knew that they knew that they knew that the angels were about to come back and restore the kingdom. And when it didn't happen and everything's just, burned to the ground, it's like, what do we do now? Like, how do we explain this?
yeah.
Factors like that come in, and especially too with visions. People in that day were heavily into visions, whether there's some arguments to be made it was through psychedelics, but also just through meditation and through food deprivation. It talks about even Jesus going into the desert for 40 days and not eating anything. Your brain does some crazy things to you when you haven't eaten for a long time.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people looking and having and claiming to have had visions of these heavens. And you get to Paul in 1 Corinthians, and of course, first on the Damascus road, he said, I had a vision from God. And it's interesting that Damascus was their key word for Qumran, which is fascinating. But he's on the way to Damascus, quote unquote, and he gets this vision. And then later in 1 Corinthians, he says, hey, I want to tell you something. I had a vision. I went up to the third heaven. That's exactly what all these other people have been saying. I went up to the seventh heaven. I went up to the sixth heaven. And they're doing all these stories, these angelic stories. And Paul wasn't the only one. He was one of many people doing it. So why Paul particularly got chosen is like there were political reasons. People were fighting, and factions were saying, I want my story to win. And of course, the biggest win was with Constantine, when he basically said, you're all going to believe this, enough with Mithraism. You're all going to believe Christianity.
Yeah.
People don't even give this stuff a second thought. It's what bothers me the most is not just not knowing the history. It's the ambivalence. Like, I don't really care. I don't care where it came from. I know it came from God. It's like, no, you don't know it came from God. And that bothers me so much when I think about, number one, people doing it, but number two, the big thing on my heart is indoctrinating it into children, telling kids, check your brains in at the door. We want you to simply say, yes, this is true. Yes, this is true. Yes, this is true. And you parrot it young enough, long enough, frequently enough, and you can't you can't think outside that box. You are stuck. And that's what the psychological abuse of childhood indoctrination is, why it's so bad, is
Yeah, it
because you
becomes your reality, whether it's not the real reality, but just becomes your reality because this is what you grew up in and
yeah
it's what was real to you and everyone around you. So it just becomes reality no matter what, or you can't really help it,
yeah
especially for being indoctrinated into it.
Can I ask on that note? I wanted to ask, I'll leave us some time to talk as well about your time with struggling with addiction. But before we do, a good
Yeah,
segue might be kind of to bounce off what you just said. Part of the issue, I think, here is that people are truly addicted to their God figure. Like when
yeah,
you talked about your dad, being a great dad, but we all know that if a dad or mom were to look at you as a young child and you're doing something, like say you're making a drawing or you're learning to do a sport, and they say to you, "Hey Chip, great job. That drawing is amazing." It feels good. It feels good to get that praise. Hey Chip, I see you got an A today on your test at school. Amazing. Thank you so much. Great job. You're so smart.
your hard work is being acknowledged.
Yeah, and the chemicals in your brain are saying this is good.
Yeah,
Well, if you have a sky daddy in your brain that says to you, "Hey Chip, you went to church today. Good job.
yeah, yeah,
Thank you
yeah,
for obeying me. Chip, you read my Bible today. Good job. Chip, you
yeah,
prayed to me. Good job. You get it enough. You sang my songs, my hymns. Good job. It feels good." And it's like an addiction. And maybe I'll open that floor there for you to talk about any response to that kind of generic concept, but also maybe to start to introduce your actual story with literal addiction.
yeah. Well, I think we all have addictions in some way or another. Um, some can be more healthy addictions. Some can be less healthy addictions. I I think I've had both. Like a healthy addiction would be reading and learning about astronomy and being addicted to just wanting to learn more and more about space. Sure, that's a healthier addiction than going down the route of shooting up heroin. So, but we all can get addictions and get latched on to things for a certain period of time, whether we wanted to from the beginning or not. And that's kind of, you can put that into religion or people growing up in religion as they kind of get addicted to that religion and the self-reinforcement it has and the gratitude that they feel they get every day. And like you were saying, good job you read your Bible today, good job that you decided to go to church and you decided to do this for somebody and help somebody out today. It reinforces, especially if you got a bunch of people around you saying good job as well, not just the God in your head, but telling you that this is good, this is what you should be doing. So, and as that comes into my own addiction, I didn't necessarily grow up knowing much about addiction and knowing how it festers inside people or how to defeat it or what to do if you get addicted to certain things. So I just always had an interest with the dark side of kind of life and the things you're not supposed to do, and don't do that. It was my brain was like, well, I want to do that because I want to know why I shouldn't do that. They can tell me all they want, but I want to feel it. I want to know inside for sure in my brain, like, oh, that is not good. I know why it's not good. I felt what it's like. Don't do this. But I always just followed down the dark side. Wasn't like maybe, I was just raised really well. And so the darkness just seemed like something so on the other side of my normal reality that I really just wanted to try it or something. But I don't know, it just kind of progressed over a while and grew into from just being really, I think I was addicted to friendships and having attention of people around me. That's what made me kind of ditch school, drop out of school, look for friends that gave me a good feeling, and I latched onto those friends. And that was probably one of my biggest mistakes, was picking the wrong friends to latch onto. And but it was something that I enjoyed because the people that were not going to school, who were giving school the finger or didn't listen to the teachers and stuff, was the ones that I don't know, for some reason I admired. because I wasn't someone who I was, so I wanted to be someone who didn't have to kiss ass all the time and take society necessarily seriously all the time. And I fell down that trap and that trope for a little bit, but eventually I started, doing drugs and getting into, marijuana, alcohol, and all that. But eventually it led into heroin, and the heroin addiction was the worst part of the addiction. I don't use any drugs to this day anymore, but at the time that was a long 5 years. About 5 years of going on opiates and going on heroin. 5 years of just going down this miserable life where every day, every morning, you just feel like crap. You feel like the worst sickness you've ever felt. And all you care about is getting rid of that sickness. And so you go and you use again. And then the next day it just repeats, and it keeps repeating this pattern. I'm sick. I don't want to feel sick. I'm sick. I don't want to feel sick. And eventually you don't think you can get out of that pattern. And so that's where the thoughts of suicide start coming in a lot more frequently, because you realize I can't break this pattern no matter what I do, because I can't stop using this drug, because every time I stop using the drug, I feel like I want to kill myself anyways. And then when I'm on the drug, I hate myself for using the drug and I want to kill myself anyways. So it's just all you think about was the suicide a lot of the time, at least after a while. But
So were
yeah,
you actually contemplating suicide at one point?
Yeah, there's a lot of times where I contemplated suicide, but it only happened for a second, maybe two, or a couple moments, right? Because I'd always come out of it right again, just instantly come out and be like, why would I do that? If I can get myself out of this addiction right now, and I need to be able to picture myself on the other side, outside of the addiction, what my life's going to be like, what I would be doing right now if I wasn't addicted to this drug. What would the things I want to do? And I start picturing what I would do if I got clean off this drug. And I'm like, so now I just need to spend 3 to maybe 7 days just getting off this drug, and then I can be over here, being happy and not feeling like shit every morning, being not being sick every morning. So you kind of paint this image of what you could be like if you got done with this. And of course I have my family. So my family was a big part of that, because, I've once made a pact with my sister that we want to kill ourselves, a long time ago. So that always, every time I think about suicide, I play that conversation in my head of me and her talking about how we're both going to commit to not taking our lives, because we had a friend or a couple friends who have done that. So we just made a pact between us that it wasn't something that we would ever do to each other. So, and then my loving family, just my mom and my dad, just how much it would affect them if I had died from this drug, or if I had committed suicide. I can just picture what it was like for them losing me, and it didn't make me feel good at all. So there was it took about 2 years of even just trying to get clean off drugs, that eventually it worked.
Can I ask, before you talk about that whole process of getting clean, did anyone throw at you the whole idea of, you need God to get, like, this is beyond you, this is outside of you need a higher power, to borrow the AA phrase, you need a higher power outside of you to pull yourself out of this? And even, did anyone, maybe a corollary question, did anybody ever actually directly attribute your hard journey there to you're here because you're fighting God. You're not supposed to have a good life, Chip. You're supposed to really be down and out, because you clearly have a God-shaped hole in your life, and until you have God fill that hole, of course it's going to suck, because you're trying to buck the way you're like, it's like a robot trying to do something different than it's designed to do. It's not going to work. You have a programming. If you do your programming, things work well. You are designed by God to pursue him. You're pursuing pleasure or fulfillment or happiness or anything with drugs or alcohol or whatever. It's not going to work, Chip. You got to have God. Did anyone ever kind of come at you, or did you just ever think that yourself?
First of all, like, my life worked really well kind of up until high school anyways, so even without God. So my life was a great life up until that point.
Awesome.
But when I went to rehab, and I got clean when I went up to Bend, Oregon. And there I was forced to believe in a God. I was forced to take in the higher power, because it was all part of the regiment on how you start the program and get through the program and get out of the program. This is the steps you have to take, and God and your higher power. But
Is
really
that the
not, they
typical
weren't
12
even,
steps?
yeah, but they had their own kind of get rid of the higher power. It's definitely God kind of concept, right? Don't think like, if you want to believe in dragons as your higher power or something, you can't. That's not what this is about, right? And NA, you could, if you're saying like my higher power is the energy of the universe, or my higher power is, the animals in the backyard, you can get away with that in NA. That can be your higher power. But in this, it's God. It is God. And at the time, I didn't believe in God either. So I went into this program, and I was being taught about God and everything he was going to do to help us get clean, and what we needed to do to get ourselves in touch with God and learn what he wants us to do so we can actually get clean off this drug. That was the only way this is going to work. So I had an issue with that, because I didn't believe in God then. I was 18. So I didn't have a belief in God then, because I wasn't raised with one either. So it was just kind of something that, I can put on the mask, like I was saying, the Christian mask, and be a Christian and do this and just tell them what they want to hear. Sure, I believe in God. This is all the steps I need to take to get clean and get out of here. Good. I'll do that. And then when I get out of there, I can just kind of throw it all away. And like, I played the part. Good. Now let's move on. But I had an argument with a few of the counselors and people that were trying to get me to believe in the God. And I had an issue, and they had to call my dad and tell him that your son is having an issue with God and he needs to believe in God for all this to work and all this. And my dad he wasn't like, he didn't get on the phone and like, Chip, good job, like keep it up or anything. No, he kind of broke himself and was like, no, I'm not really an atheist, or I don't believe in God. I have a more Buddhist style of my beliefs, I'm more Buddhist if anything, and all this. And I was just like thinking, that's such bullshit. Like, I know you're just saying what they want you to hear that make me follow the rules here and stuff. Like, he didn't have my back or anything, but I mean, I guess I really didn't expect them to. But it was just a scene for a while that now everyone that I saw at this rehab or this program was whispering behind my back, and oh, there goes the atheist. He's destined for hell. He's not gonna make it like the rest of us.
So it sounds like they were actually Christians. Is that fair to guess?
Yeah, I believe so. It wasn't like, the program wasn't based around the Bible. It was based around the belief that God and Jesus were what was going to save you from your addiction. There was no Bible studies during this thing. There was no readings of the Bible. It was just, God is the one that's going to help you out of this. Here's normal rehab for the most part. Like, if you got God and Jesus and religion out of the rehab, it was pretty much normal, with that, in that sense. But there was just an overlying thing of God and Jesus that eventually would catch back up to you every week or so. You'd hear about it again, and you have them saying, have you prayed to God? Have you prayed to Jesus today? Have you made amends? Have you tried to, talk to anybody about your atheism or your lack of belief in any higher power or God? It's just, I got those questions all the time. And it was really hard for me to stick in that program, because I was so opposite of everyone that was there, because they're all taking this in and fully participating and no problem, questioning. They never questioned the God or the Jesus, so it was just hard for me to wrap my mind around it, because I believed in no God. I believed in no Jesus. It was something completely else. So yeah, it was one of those things that I had to leave the program. I never finished it. I had to get out of there, and I did get out of there, and everything turned out fine. But it was my experience of that was new to me. I've never experienced an actual program and people all around me trying to get me to believe in God. So
that must have been intense. Almost like sounds like a mind job. The way you were probably just barraged by it.
Yeah, it was. I learned a lot about myself still at the time. Like, that's when I really found out that I was an atheist. Like, that was the moment, because I realized, haven't believed in a God up into that point, but I didn't have any title for it. It was just, I was living my life, and while people believe in God over here, I was just happy living my life over here. I didn't need to give myself a title or a name for it or anything. So, but that was the moment when I became an atheist for the first time. It was after that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me just to have a quick comment about it. Number one, this whole push of it, you need God, you need Jesus, God meaning Yahweh and his son Jesus. But if history had just landed a little bit differently, they would have been saying the same exact thing, but it would have been about Mithras.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like just history just happened to work that way. But also just this whole idea of you need this God because he's so good, he's so loving, he cares for you, he's there to help you. And going back to some of the bad stuff we talked about half an hour ago, like this God is a psycho God. You're talking about a God who commands, genocide, land theft, slavery, genital mutilation. We didn't talk about, circumcision. Like what kind of God says, I need you to take your little babies that are so beautiful, and for the boys, you got to make sure, as much as I technically made them perfect, cut off the end of their penises. Like,
Yeah.
like this is sick. A God who says, I delight in burnt offerings. I delight in smelling the sweet aroma of burning flesh from these animals that you killed in the blood. Like that's the best you can do to tell me I need that. And the psycho God that says, I love you so much that I will offer you heaven, but if you don't accept my free gift, I'm going to burn you in hell forever. Like
Yeah.
that's the best God you can come up with. Is this God that number one, you don't know where he came from. Number two, he's a psycho, and number three, he's like a narcissist. I need you to love me, worship me, or I'm going to get you. Like this is if you were married and you said some of this stuff to your wife, they should call the cops on you in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Like you need me, and you have to love me in every way, and don't deviate from your love for me. And if you do, I'm going to kill you. Like
Yeah.
that's some sick theology. And and then for them to tell you, here you are in your weakest part of your life, arguably so far, and you need help, and they say what you need most is a psychopathic deity as your worldview. That's what you need. That's what's going to heal you. It just blows my mind to even think about.
Yeah. Yeah. He demands a blood sacrifice from you or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, what did you say with people said, well, how did you get out? What were the last final steps that you took to get off of drugs?
It was heroin. So it took a lot of effort, a lot of time getting clean for a few days and getting clean for a few days and using, and then eventually I got clean for a week, and then I'd use, and I got clean for 2 weeks. And so it kind of just progressed that way. Just getting clean, using, and eventually I got out of it. Eventually I got to the point where I was just clean long enough that the thoughts about using went away, and I came out the other side and was the happiest I'd ever been. Because when I was in addiction, I had so many of my friends just around me die. Just one day we went out at night, they go home, and then the next day I find out they're dead. That happened a few times with my friends.
Was it more overdoses or suicide or a mixture?
Overdoses. It was overdoses, and I always, I always kept in the back of my mind how much I actually do love life, and I do care about life, and I want to continue living. I don't want this drug to kill me. So every time I used, I would never exceed certain amounts, and I would stay very low on the milligrams of usage. So, I knew I always wanted to get out of it. I wasn't going to be addicted for the whole time, but I figured there's only 2 ways out. Well, there might be 3 ways out, right? You can either go to prison, you can die, or you can get clean, right? But to a lot of people, the only way to get clean is to find Jesus and God. And that's the only way you're going to get out of that. And I just want people to know that's not even close to being true. I got out of it without any God or Jesus. Actually, I rejected that claim full-heartedly, and I still got out of it. Maybe it wasn't the most ideal way of dealing with it, or maybe, since it took me 100 tries of getting clean and not clean, it took me 100 tries. It doesn't mean it was a failure. It didn't work. Sometimes that's just what it takes. You have to get used to doing something again. start being normal and being clean. I had to get used to that feeling. So eventually it just took over again. And I was done with the drugs. The drugs I could just put away after a while. But it's something that I did with the love and compassion of my friends and family. Something that I did about just caring about life in general, and the fact that death scares me in a lot of ways. I don't want to die, so I want to live, but I also don't want to lie to myself to get to these points. If I don't believe in God or Jesus, I don't want to have to lie to myself to get over this, or to be clean again. That's not something I wanted to be and do, because if I don't believe in a God, but I have to tell myself I believe in a God to get through this addiction, then it kind of makes me feel like I'm not an honest person, and I can't be honest with myself if I have to lie to myself. I didn't see where that road would take me down. It would be a bad road if I started doing things like that and believing and things like that, lying to myself basically to get a feeling or to get over something. And I don't think that's the way it should be. I should have to tell myself the truth at all times. And if I can't follow the truth, like the truth that if I stay with this drug, I'm going to die. The truth is, if I stay this route, I'm going to lose my family and friends. If I stay, like all the truths need to come and hit you at the same time. I mean, there's so many others that they hit you. They hit you at once sometimes, and it really makes you want to get clean and stuff. But sometimes you just need some people around you that show you love and compassion and will just be there for you. And sometimes that can just be enough, even for a heroin addict. You don't need God or the 12 steps. I know a lot of people feel like they do, and I'm for that. If the 12 steps and God get you clean, then I'm fine with that. I'm not going to yell at those people saying, no, that's the wrong way to do it. I feel like there's no right way to do it, right? If it works, it works. The best part is that you're not on drugs anymore. Like, that's what we should all be grateful for and trying to reach, and that's the goal. So I guess if it's God for people, it's God for people. If it's your family and the people around you and just a general love for life, then that can be it too. But I know that a lot of people, especially the ones I met, didn't have family. They didn't have friends to tell them what to, how to treat themselves, or how to think for themselves, or give them reason to believe in themselves. I met so many people that didn't have any of that. They didn't have people believing in them. So sometimes I can see why God, imagining there's a guy up there that believes in you or something, could be helpful. So, I see that. Of course, I disagree with it, but I can't argue against people who get clean from it. And whether it's true or not, whether there's God or not, if it helped them get clean, I can't yell at those people,
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the only thing that concerns me about those outcomes is that it never stops there. It doesn't stop with God got me clean. It's God got me clean, and therefore
now God wants this.
God, yeah, and also God wants you all to believe the same thing I do. You need to believe in blood magic, specifically Jesus is blood magic, and if you do believe just like me, you'll be fine. If you don't, then you're gonna face eternal punishment. And especially with kids, again, the childhood indoctrination stuff, it makes my blood boil. But yeah, if people can find a way to get off, get clean with their higher power as a crutch for now, and then maybe start to rebuild separately later, that's a very good thing. I was curious, when you got clean and you started to kind of rebuild your life and so forth, it sounded like, from what I've understood of your story, that you did get a little bit more interested at that point in thinking through the philosophical ideas around atheism. Is that fair to say? And what was that path like? Like, what got you more interested in listening to certain people, certain leaders in the movement, and who did you listen to, if that's true? And what were some of the main points that you recall that really resonated with you as you started to think through it?
Well, as I was talking about with that rehab that I was in, like, that's when I decided, or like came to the belief that I was an atheist, but I didn't know how to defend that belief and that idea. So I turned to other people, turned to YouTube and people who were knew how to defend their atheism and knew how to ask the right questions and I just had a better thought process around the whole thing. So I had Christopher Hitchens was just one first and foremost that got me thinking a little bit more deeply about why I believe in atheism and what it really means to be an atheist. And then, I got Carl Sagan, who I don't know if he even said he was an atheist, but he was just someone who showed me such a bigger universe than this one where people believe in God and Jesus. There was already this big, vast universe where I was contemplating the infinite. And that was just a thing that my brain latched onto, was always thinking about the infinite. And let's see, I mean, nowadays, I go through like, what's his name? I go through Matt Dillahunty, Aaron Ra. Those are like two that always come up just off the top of my head. You got Richard Carrier, who's someone I listen to a lot. Bart Ehrman, all these people, but those guys weren't really there in the beginning as much as Christopher Hitchens and Carl Sagan was, and maybe Neil deGrasse Tyson, people like that. So I was always interested in science. Science took me to whole nother places that I couldn't get to on my own. So I love just dreaming about other planets and other civilizations that might be out there. And it was always, it was fun to go down the road of learning about evolution and the way that our brains actually kind of work and the way that we evolved into our natural, environment and habitats, and how we've grown from millions of years ago to today. And just all that stuff was always took my thought process more than any God or Jesus could. But that's because I was raised away from religion. I mean, it wasn't necessarily on purpose, or maybe it was, I don't know, but I was always somewhere else other than around a religion. So it was always me looking on from the outside in on religion, and it was always easy to be skeptical of it when you're in that position already, right? You can ask questions about it and raise questions without people telling you don't ask that, or that's not a good question, or you can't ask that, anything like that. There wasn't anyone telling me, oh, this scientist is lying to you, or this guy right here, don't believe him, don't believe anything science tells you. When all the things that have made me who I am today was because of science and scientists creating and inventing. I mean, that's all I see. The science is that they're growing and creating and inventing things, and these inventions get put into society, and the society grows and benefits from these inventions, whether it's the light bulb or the car, the pistons in an engine, or it's just like a jet engine, or it's a satellite. Whatever it is, these things greatly benefit and grow from us, and that to me is what's true. These guys can produce and invent, and these things get put into society, and we grow from them. And that was always true to me. That was things that you could test and could see that they're really actually growing society and helping out. So I never had a place for a God that did that. It was always, I could always see the people around me being more than human in a lot of ways. Those were the guys I would put on a pedestal, or I would think that's the highest, form of life form right there, is the smartest man in the room, So, and that was actually always my dad in a lot of ways. He was always the smartest man in the room. So it kind of rubbed off on me that I kind of fall off the same kind of tree, the apple tree, I'm not far from him. And it's just always more real to me was watching scientists invent stuff and get their Nobel Prizes for that. That was always the truth, what was real to me. And I could relate to that because those guys are heroes. And we look where we are today with our society. These guys are the ones that got us here, these Einsteins and Copernicuses and Galileos and Newtons, these guys are obviously really well known, and there's so many people in between that helped get us here, but those are the people that I think, it's the reason why we're at the society right now, the one that we have today, the cars and the airplanes and the cell phones, especially the cell phones, right? This is all science doing things and creating things and showing that it works. If you could do that for a religion, I would love to see that. because I can't see religion inventing anything and creating anything and getting us to where we are today. It wasn't religion that put us here right now. It was science and the scientific method, and following that method and finding out how things work and finding mathematical theorems and finding proofs and truth and how and all that. So that was always what was real to me. And
Hmm.
I think that's what took the part in place of religion in my head, you know.
Would you say, as you develop that worldview, and that when you look at people that have a focus basically on what is life all about, what's the meaning of it all, what's the purpose, why are we here, why is there something rather than nothing, what makes your life valuable,
Yeah.
what makes what's the end goal for your life,
Yeah.
as you look at what you personally would define as your meaning and purpose, your how you even go about defining that, how you even think through it. What would you say is your your driving passion for life at this point? Like, what are you what does success look like for Chip as the best life that Chip can live now, and for as long as you've got life? What does the best life look like for you?
Well, I mean, I have to say that it might come off a little weird, but I have a nihilistic kind of point of view on a lot of things. When people say, "What's the purpose and what's the meaning?" I kind of ask, "Does there have to be one? Um,
Hmm.
does there need to be a purpose?" And I can't. When I think really deeply about that, I come to the conclusion I don't really think there is a meaning or a purpose other than to keep reproducing as a species. But I can create new purposes other than that. I can find purpose for myself in other ways. Like, as we keep progressing as a society, we should have a purpose to take care of the planet as a big one. Because if we destroy this planet or ruin the atmosphere on it, we might not be able to live here at all. And there's no place for us to live anywhere else in the solar system at this point. And space seems very hospitable. Uh, it doesn't seem like it wants to take care of us or care about us. So I think the purpose, if there is any kind of purpose, is to watch the species and take care of ourselves and the planet and other species as well and other animals, because this is the one planet we got. And I don't think there is any purpose or true meaning, or at least absolute purpose or absolute meaning. No absolutes, but
Yeah.
you can give yourself purpose in almost anything. Uh, you can find a purpose in music. You can find a purpose in just taking care of somebody,
Yeah.
having kids and having a family and making sure your kids are taken care of. I mean, that
Hmm.
can just be purpose enough. But if people are like, why are we here? What's the purpose? I just kind of go, I don't think there really is one. It's just you have a life, live it. Do what
Yeah.
you have to do to just find a way to live your life and be happy.
Hmm.
But there is no intrinsic absolute purpose, I don't think.
Yeah. Very well said. I totally would agree with that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if there's no designer, which there's no evidence for a designer, then there can't be some design where, like, if you deviate from the design, that you're somehow, messing up his plan. Like, there's no plan here. This
Yeah.
is an amazing thing that we are alive. It's amazing to breathe and be able to move around and live our lives. But yeah, there's no predetermined, if you do this, you're living a good life, and if you don't do this, you're not. And this is my rule book. But I do
Yeah.
love what you said too about how you make your own purpose. And Dan Barker has a book about that. But instead of the purpose-driven life, the life-driven purpose,
Yeah.
where he kind of took that book's title and flipped it on its head. But what a great sense too to say, this is about you. Like, you are in the driver's seat, you are the captain of your soul, so to speak. You
Yeah.
get to decide what the best life is. But what a beautiful thing it is for us to bring to the table so much love, not because God compels us to, or because we're trying to mimic God's love or be grateful for God's love, but just purely because we choose to. Like, I can love someone, and I can give money to someone in need, not because I have to or because I'm grateful for God's sacrifice. I just want to. I just see someone in need and I just want to help them. I just want to bless them. And the idea of leaving this planet better than we found it, like you said with the environment, what a great goal. What if,
Yeah.
and I know your dad's, had some, I'm sure, some input in that, but what a great goal to say this planet is so amazing. Like, let's leave our the next generations in a better spot than we are. And I think too, my one of my motivations that I've come up with, again, not according to some master plan, but just my personal goal, is I think that one of the best things that we can do to leave this planet better than we found it is to speed up the end of religion on this planet.
Yeah, I
The
agree with you.
When you look at like what happened with the last 4 years of the last administration, and you
Mhm.
look at the just the horrors of some of the messages that the Christian community has begun to ramp up in they're trying to be more vocal. They're trying to get more power. They're trying to dominate the Supreme Court. They're trying to dominate, everything they can. They want to control this. They want to turn this into a theocracy.
Yeah,
And I really feel like this is one of those, Esther moments for such a time as this. Like we need to turn the tide away from mythological worldviews. I think we're going to be, I mean, yes, there is a pure cold atheism that some countries tend toward that needs to be, we need to be careful about how we do it, have the right conversations, and be have a real humanity to what we're doing, and to be humanists, and to truly love each other, and to love the species, and love the planet. But to be able to say, at the very least, like, we don't have all the answers, no one does, but we know where the answers aren't. They're not
yeah,
in the blood of some demigod. They're not in the cross and resurrection of a guy that was a copy of a guy that was a copy of another guy. Like, we're not, this mystery cults from 2,000 years ago are not the solution to any of our problems, and arguably they're the reason for a lot of the problems that we do have. And
okay.
I think it's been argued pretty well that if we hadn't had the Dark Ages, if we hadn't had so much overarching religion, the question will come up, like, what could have we have done scientifically if every time a scientist came to the table and said, hey, I think we might not be on a flat earth, I think it might be a globe, instead of saying, huh, you might be right, they just killed him, or put him in
Yeah,
prison. Or if someone says, hey, I don't think the earth is the center of the universe, I think we revolve around the sun, and I think the sun revolves around some other stuff, for them to,
yeah,
instead of killing him, to say, let's listen to the scientists. Where could we be? Who
yeah,
knows what might have been. But I think it's still that point of, like, well, some of that stuff that we'd say, well, if those guys had been listened to by the early church, and the church had bowed their knee to science a lot earlier, then maybe we'd be further along. Well, maybe this is still that kind of time right now, where maybe the Christians, and especially the Christian right, and this whole theocracy stuff, what they want to do to our country and our world, maybe we're still in that fragile time where if we don't stand up and we don't speak and fight against what they're trying to do, they're gonna literally shoot humanity in the foot, so to speak, and they're
yeah,
gonna mess up our future. And I really feel a burden to say it's time to end the mythology. Like, we are not served better for it, and especially when you think about the kids. I mean, I've got four little ones, four kids under age 7 right now. It's a busy place, and I look at their little minds. Look at the way they say all this stuff every day, and you can kind of wonder what they're thinking through, and how they're
yeah,
phrasing things, and you're like, your minds are growing, and it's beautiful, and yet they're being, at the same time, kids all over the planet are being exposed to this idea that the very best thing you need in life is to worship this psycho god. I was reading even the Jerusalem Post, I believe it was, yesterday, where one of the religious leaders was saying that the young boys should stop studying science and math and just study Torah,
okay,
permanently. Like, don't study that stuff, it's irrelevant. Like, what could be more important than the Torah? And I just
yeah,
thought, what in the world are you all doing to the children?
yeah,
And once, if you get them young, arguably it's really hard to get back out. And some people will never escape. They won't even be able to fathom what an escape would look like. I know I was one of them. I could not
yeah,
fathom it until it happened to me.
yeah. I can't even fathom what that's like, growing up like that.
Yeah.
It's Yeah, that's so different from how I was raised.
Mm.
But I suspect it's kind of like them too, trying to imagine how I grew up like I was raised, and growing up without God. That was probably really hard for someone who is, as a kid, indoctrinated into this, trying to imagine what that life would be like,
Yeah,
as
it's
well.
quite a mind job. And I liken my escape, and it happened literally in an hour. Like, I thought about it for 18 months, and I was not escaping in my mind. I was like, I'm just recalculating my theology. But then it happened right here at this computer, almost 2 years ago, September of 2019. and it was like someone jacked me into the matrix, and they're teaching neo jujitsu, and he's like in 10 seconds he knows jujitsu. It was
Yeah,
like someone jacked me in and suddenly like redefined reality for me. I was like, oh shoot, none of this stuff that I believed has been real. And I'm like, I was
that's
stuck in the
crazy.
matrix for all this time.
Yeah, yeah, I
It's a
can see
mind
that.
job, but yeah, it's so good to be free. I mean, I had more peace in the first day than I did in 43 years as a Christian.
Yeah, I
Um,
actually felt so happy for you when I found out about it, and I remember thinking to
Thank you.
myself, I'm like, wow, Tim, really? Like, he was the last person I'd actually would think would make it out of that, because I felt like you were so devoted and so honest in your belief, and you were so willing to tell me or tell people about it and try to get people to be saved,
Yep.
and why it's important. But the thing about you too was you were always the nicest guy in the room, and that was always something I admired about you even growing up. It was just I could always tell that, I don't know, you were always so honest with everybody around you, and I guess eventually that led up to you just being completely honest with yourself and in realizing some things. And maybe that was, the best thing that you could have had was your own honesty and uh I don't know, your own perspective on yourself, and knowing that being nice and treating people right is the best way to go about living life. But do you think, like, do you take a lot of things from your religion, like, let's say, what you were raised to believe, like how you treat people that you're trying to convert, or how teach you how to listen to people, teach you how to ask questions or talk or just show compassion for anyone? Like, you think, like, you would be the same person you are now, that kind of person, if you had not had religion? Like, do you ever imagine what kind of person you would be if you were raised outside religion? Do you think you would be the same person you are today?
I would say I haven't. It's a good question. I haven't thought about that to probably the depth I should. That's a really good question, though. I do. I obviously would be very different if I had been raised in an atheistic, secular environment.
Yeah,
I I like
it
to
seems
think.
like you
I like
would
to
be the
hope that
same
there's
kind
some
of
good
guy.
personality traits that would still be there.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely do. I think you'd still be like the nicest guy in the room. So,
Well, thank you for saying so. And I do know that my mom used to talk about. I was always the sensitive one. Like somebody would be crying in the room, like
yeah,
another kid would be crying, or somebody, or an adult would even be just kind of sad, and no one else would notice. And I would go up to them and give them a hug and talk to them. How you doing? What's
yeah,
wrong? Can I help?
yeah,
She said I'd do that from the earliest days, and I like to think that 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 stuff is hopefully part of people's personalities. That you do bring good things to the table, and it's like you do want to unravel stuff and be like, where were the roots of Christianity and religion, and try to pull them out. But there are some good things hopefully that just would have been there regardless. And I think too, there's nothing wrong with, to me too, of saying, Jesus said, for example, to turn your cheek. If someone hits you, turn your cheek. Try to
right,
forgive. Should I forgive my brother 7 times? No, 70 times 7. Meaning just don't even stop counting. Stop counting your forgivenesses. Just forgive. There's some good things we can take from this religion.
yeah,
You don't have to be in a Christian religion to do it. You could take a lot of them from Plato, and because a lot of them did come from Plato, from Socrates, from a lot of other stuff, a lot of things from Pythagoras. You can take some of these good ideas from other places, but um, yeah, I do wonder. I do wonder what it would have been like.
yeah.
I was curious for you, and I know we've been going for a while here. I've got two last big questions for you.
Okay.
One of them is sin and its corollary, shame. A lot of people that are Christians grow up having shame, purity culture.
Yeah.
The whole, people have promise rings. I promise I'm not going to have sex before marriage.
Mm,
Guys are always, in these little men's groups. Hey guys, stop masturbating. Hey guys, stop looking at dirty pictures. And okay, yeah, let's pray. Let's keep each other accountable. Hey, were you pure this week? Yeah, I was pure. Were you? Yeah, I was pure. Okay, good. We're obeying God. And if you
yeah.
fail, of course, you just feel this shame of, oh God, I'm so sorry. I looked when I shouldn't have, or whatever. People drown in shame as Christians often. And I was
I can
curious
hear
how that's different for you.
it.
Did you feel any sense of shame that you would compare to that, or what was that like for you?
Oh, I mean, it was nothing like that for me. No shame when it comes to, like, masturbation or looking at dirty pictures or thinking about girls or doing the typical puberty, grow boying, the boy growing. That was nothing ever said to me that you should be shameful of that or that's a sin. I knew what sins were growing up, but I never got told by anyone I was a sinner or I was doing any sin. So I don't relate in a lot of that ways. I hear the stories about people being shamed for, committing sins and being a sinner. But to me, I never got any of that. It was always so much love and acceptance around me at all times. And if there was someone doing this, telling people that there should be shameful in any way, that I'm pretty sure that maybe I encountered them as a kid and stuff, but my dad would probably just pull us away and take us in another direction, and then tell us that we're beautiful or something, or tell us that he's doesn't matter what we do and stuff, he'll still love us. And shame was, I mean, you kind of have your own personal shame or guilt about certain things, sure, growing up, but it was never an authority on high giving that, making you feel that way. It was always kind of your own self shame and feeling bad or guilty about certain things. And my dad helped, and my mom, with that, with just teaching us the right kind of punishment for things, not beating us with belts or smacking us on the ass, but thinking of actual good punishments and ways for us to learn from our mistakes without making us feel like we're horrible people. Or actually, at the end of it, we have grown as a child, and we have grown with more acceptance, or we've grown with more understanding of ourselves and why we do things. And I think that was always like my mom and my dad's main point, was for us to understand why we were doing things, and to understand why, if something is bad, or if we see it as morally, if we say it as morally, I don't know, just it wasn't moral in the begin with. If we see it as it's not moral, then he'll explain why it's not moral and why he sees it that way. But my dad was always, he could always change your perspective on something. Like, well, let's look at it as what if it was moral? How would we treat people? Would people benefit from this if this was a moral action? And you could see that it didn't. So you understood why it wasn't moral. And so he'd just run through scenarios for you on why we don't do things. Because if we did do these things, people would get hurt. People would be affected by them. We're not really growing and taking our society to the best place it can if we do these things. If we really want to progress and stuff, we have to agree to some kind of underlying terms that you don't hurt people, the golden rule, whatever it is. But those are things that he taught us. It was never any shame, though. Never felt that. And I feel sorry for so many people that have.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that was like.
We touched a little bit there on sexuality. I was just curious, did you ever face the conservative fundamentalist Christian perspective on ostracizing people that are gay? And
yeah, I mean, that made itself into the schools. It made itself into my life because it affected the kids around me. They talk about it, and when you're younger, 8th grade, 9th grade, maybe even just 6th, we'll just say 6. I mean, you start hearing about gay people, and then you start seeing how people treat them, and you start realizing that a lot of it can be religious motivated for the way they're getting treated. So that was one of the big things for me for pushing back against religion and seeing religion more for what it was how they treated homosexuality. Because I just saw people who were getting treated poorly, and they don't deserve to have that. No one does. We all deserve. I think this is the one life that we got, and we all deserve a beautiful, prospering life. If we can get there, we all deserve that. And if anyone's not being treated the same as other people, then that's a problem, and we need to fix that and change that. Everyone deserves the best life that we can give them. And if they're not getting treated properly, if they're not getting treated humanly, it makes me angry, and it makes me want to fight against religion, because I can't take myself to hate or tell someone that they're a bad person, or they're not quite human, or there's something wrong with them. I can't take myself to do that, but I can take myself and put myself in their shoes, and I can imagine what it's like to be them and walk in those shoes and get treated and be made fun of for whatever it is they're being made fun of for, or just whatever. I can put myself in people's shoes, and I've always been good at that. To feel what people feel, and that's always what's drive my belief on people. And if I can put myself in their shoes and feel what they feel, then I think I become a better person as well for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my last question is going to be a little bit more of a, hopefully fun one. It's a little bit deep, but it's more a little bit less intense.
Okay.
The afterlife.
Yeah,
That's what this is in many ways about. Christianity is obviously
I agree.
about control. It's about power, but at the end of the day, it's about carrots and sticks. Avoid hell and get yourself to heaven.
Yeah.
That is the end goal. Is you need to be able to avoid the ultimate destruction
Avoid
and
the worst hell.
first hell,
Yeah.
and get to the best heaven, get to reality of life with God in heaven forever, in the beauties and the glory of it all. For a lot of people that deconvert, myself included, that is one of the hardest pills to swallow, is realizing that the likelihood of there being an afterlife, at least from where I'm standing, is next to zero. Um, it's hard because you're banking everything on it, but also you've also been kind of trained to say that this world is not your home. This world, there's even a song, "This world is not my home. I'm just to pass through." Like I am. Yes, it's important what I do here. It's very important what I do here, but this is like a blink of an eye, and then eternity is forever and ever and ever and ever. And when you get to eternity, and you get to trillion years, you're gonna look back on your life and it's gonna feel like it just went by like that.
Yeah.
And so it's like that's the real life. That's what you're waiting to get to. Well, when you deconvert and you realize none of that's probably true, it's so hard to accept that this is probably the only life I get. And I'm not even promised this whole life. I'd love to think I'm going to live to 80 or 90 or 100. I might be living to the age of 50 or 45 and get in a car accident and that's it. And that it breaks your heart, obviously, because you think, I don't get a second chance. I don't, if you had died of cancer, I don't get to get a new body free of cancer. Or so and so died early in life. I don't get to see my dad who died or something. All these people that went before, you hope to see them again in the sweet by and by on the banks of Jordan, and that's not real. There's no banks of Jordan to get to, and it's like, wait, I get max like 80 years, and then I just die, like end of story. I go to dust.
Mm.
It's a heartbreaking thing, and I know some atheists will say, well, I really wouldn't want to live forever, and I certainly wouldn't want to live forever singing praises
Yeah.
to some god, in
That's
choir
true.
robes. But for me, then and now, I would have loved to have lived forever.
Yeah.
And if someone
I agree.
said, yeah, but wouldn't you want to stop at life after a zillion years or something? No,
Maybe.
I don't think. I think I would want to live literally forever.
Yeah.
I might change my mind someday, but I think I'd want to live forever and
Maybe
ever and
rest
ever.
for 1,000 years every once in a while,
Yeah,
come
exactly.
back. So, yeah.
So, yeah, have a reset. But
Yeah.
how did you ever think that there was an afterlife growing up?
Yeah.
And when you went through the drug addiction and so forth, did you get tempted to think there was an afterlife? And just how do you deal with that question of, do you think that there's a chance that there's something else? Would you want there to be something else? And how do you deal with it knowing that if you don't believe there's something else, that a whole bunch of people around you do and think that's the most important subject going?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess there's a part of me that definitely says I think maybe there's the smallest chance in hell that there's an afterlife. And
That's a good
I
one.
do want to
I
believe
love
in
the
an
way you put
afterlife.
that.
Yeah. So I do believe in an afterlife, in some small amount of a way, because I do want that to be true. I want to live forever too. I don't want to die. The fear of death can be overwhelming sometimes. I have thoughts of it at night before I go to sleep sometimes, and it scares the crap out of me. And I can see why the comforting of a heaven is really nice, because it can take away that fear and say, oh, well, I'm just gonna go into the heavens and live with people around me, and then it's all gonna be clouds and gold pillars and all, the sweet voice of God, and stuff like that. So it's a comforting thought to have an afterlife, and I see it as exactly that, a comforting thought, because I realize that's what I want to be true. But when I take myself out of my own head and what I want and look at reality and the universe in itself, I've seen so many people and things die. And I realize that when they die, they're actually dead. Like I can tell, I mean, it's hard to say, like I can tell that they're not going anywhere, but it seems like I can tell that they're not going anywhere. They were alive and now they're not. And I feel like it's just like turning off a computer and breaking it down into its components and leaving it be. It's not going to be on anymore. It's not going to do any more processing. It's going to be having the thought process of a rock now, and it's comforting and it's nice to think about an afterlife. But I always used to think of one as a kid. I used to believe in the default heaven, I would say, as a kid growing up. I believe, if you asked me up to the age of like 13 or 14, I would say I believe in a God and an afterlife. And I think that's why a lot of people believe in religion, is the fear of death and the fact that it gives a great answer for it, that great in the sense that it makes you calm about it. You don't panic or freak out about death. And that's one of the one things that I think about a lot as an atheist, is the afterlife, because I really want there to be one, but I'm not going to lie to myself to convince myself that there is one so I feel better. I want to live in the reality as the rules are set for that reality. And if there is no afterlife and all that, I don't want to believe in it, because it takes me away from this life. And if this is the one true life that I have, and this is the only one I get, I want to make sure that I'm going to live this one first, right? If there's a second one, an afterlife after this, but God, because I didn't believe in God or Jesus, and I get sent to hell for some reason, I can go at least knowing I did the best I could. I lived the best life I could. And I think it's immoral for him to even send me to hell for taking and believing things on, verifiable evidence. And if there wasn't evidence for an afterlife or evidence for a God, that the God at least knew that there wasn't evidence for me to be convinced of that. And so I went and I did the best I could with what information I had. And I wasn't going to believe things on faith. At least if there was a God, I would hope they would understand that at some very limited basis. But I would also I'm okay. I have to be okay with the acceptance that there isn't an afterlife. And sometimes that can be difficult. Sometimes it can be really easy. Some days I'm fine with it, and I go about life, I realize I want to live the best life I can. And then some days I panic about it and go, wow, I can see why people believe this religion, believe in an afterlife, because it takes away this fear that I got all the time. So maybe I should just believe and get rid of this fear and just believe for, Pascal's wager's sake, or something. So I battle with that one as an atheist, because it's just the fear of death, and that fear of death can, lead to that thought process of an afterlife. But other than that, I mean, I can't really say that I believe in an afterlife, or I think there is an afterlife of any sort, especially the Christian one. I can say that I don't believe that one exists. But of course, I'd love there to be an afterlife. Of course, I want to live forever. I don't want to die. There's so much of this universe that's there to see. There's so much. You can just picture what the future of the world looks like, and it's flying cars everywhere or something. Like, we have that image painted in our head of what the future is going to be, and we want to see that come to fruition. We don't want to be cut short and left here and not to see what Andromeda is going to be merging with the Milky Way galaxy in 3.8 billion years. I want to see that. I don't want to not be around for things like that. So I think those things keep me up at night sometimes, and I like to think deeply about them and why I believe these things. That's always a fun thing to do. Is like, oh, I see how comforting this afterlife is. I see why I want to believe in it. I see why my brain wants to latch onto it, because it gives my brain comfort and it gives me comfort. So that makes sense. And then I can stop thinking about how fearful I am of death, because now I just think I'm going to a beautiful place where my family's waiting for me, and yeah, that's comforting. But I see it as that, though, just comforting.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to put it. And I would say ditto to everything you said. And just to add, I think that as much as I would love to believe some of it, still the good parts of it,
Yeah.
there's a part of me that would just say I couldn't like you can't go back and get plugged into the matrix. And I know people would say, well, what if you could? I don't think I'd want to. I know some people. I've asked that question of somebody, and they're like, no, I would absolutely go back in the matrix. Plug me
Yeah,
back in. I don't want to know. I don't want to know what reality is. But I'm glad I know reality now. I'm glad I escaped Christianity. But if someone said, yeah, but there's so much meaning, hope, and purpose, and joy, and this is such a beautiful story. You end up in heaven where all your, you're glorified and your body is great now, and everything. All your dearest and nearest friends are probably there. Would
yeah,
you not want that? I think my issue is once you realize who made this up and how they made it up, meaning like hell coming from predominantly Zoroastrianism and certainly Hellenistic influences, with even the words Hades and Tartarus right in the text. Like this came straight out of Greek mythology. I can't unsee what I've seen, if you know what I mean. And I can't unsee the fact that I know that they came up with these stories based on many other religions that were going on at the time, and also a lot of other intertestamental apocryphal books, such as Enoch, the Ascension of Isaiah. Which again, if people haven't read these books, you got to read them. Read Enoch, read the Ascension of Isaiah, the Apocalypse of Zephaniah. I think was the early one I mentioned. They'll rock your world. You'll be like, I'm reading the early New Testament. This is the proto New Testament here. But I totally agree. It would be nice. But I think the cool thing is once you've escaped and you're not stuck in this fake reality. The cool thing to me is you have now the opportunity to use your imagination to say, well, what's the best that I can use? These guys thousands of years ago used their imagination very violently to come up with this worldview. I have I have an imagination too. I don't need to adopt their crazy views, but I have an imagination too. I can use my imagination, my talents, my skills to try to give my own kids a magical childhood, so to speak, to give people this sense, people that are hopeless, where like, I've got no money or I've got, no one loves me. You can reach out and be that person that just cares for them and to bring so much of your imagination and talent and skill and love and joy to the table and say, not because of some God or some Christian worldview, but just because of who I am and what I want to be and my desire to leave you in a great spot to feel loved and to feel cared for. I can change your world, and I can use my imagination on a bigger scale with stories and books and songs, which I'm working on, to change people's worlds and to think, well, what a beautiful thing it is to take the same imagination that was used to entrap civilization for 2,000 years or longer, and to use the same imagination and say, I'm going to free humanity. What could we be like with a free mind?
yeah,
What could the world be like with just a couple generations of entirely free thinkers? It's
yeah,
amazing to think about what could happen, and it's exciting. But
yeah. I think about kind of like that too, with a couple of generations. If we just put free education, just made free education a thing, and it didn't matter if you were, 5 years old or 55 years old, there's free education, and you can come learn and learn sciences and learn just whatever you want. You can go to a community college for free, let's say, or you can go to elementary school for free if you want. But I'm just saying, I think just that and seeing it in a couple generations of a free education would make a difference like that. And
hmm,
I think it's just, if we could get more people in education, and we can get more people problem solving, we can get more people learning sciences, we can get more people learning what it's like to be just wrong about something and discover the right answers, and that feeling, that self-gratification of learning and teaching, and I don't know, just there's so much there that I think we can just progress with as a society if we all get educated. Because I think one of the most important things is learning how to be wrong and learning how to find correct answers and having a methodology for doing that. And if you can use a scientific method to discover all the truths that we have right now today in our society, then I think you can use it to discover a lot of things and a lot about yourself. And I think you'll discover that you don't need the God or a Jesus to explain anything. That can all be explained through you and using the scientific method. And
hmm.
I think that would be a nice society to live in a few generations.
Yeah, just for us to get used to saying to ourselves, with new information, we will change our minds, as
Yeah,
opposed to
exactly.
new information is irrelevant. I've already made up my mind.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's such a good thing to hope for. So,
yeah. You can't tell me 2 + 2 doesn't equal 5.
yeah,
So, yeah.
exactly.
Mm.
I know I've asked a lot of questions, but I just wanted to open the floor to say, is there anything that I didn't ask about that you wanted to talk about before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I had some points, things about like reasons like evolution, reasons why I'm an atheist and things, but like I think this has just been a more genuine conversation than trying to go over bullet points everywhere, So
Yeah.
yeah,
Maybe we can plan one down the line for focus more on science and evolution and all that. I'd love to touch base again on some of that stuff and give us some time to ruminate and dig into some of those subtopics.
yeah, I think that's where my education is at, and where I can speak the most firmly about is those topics. So
awesome. Yeah, well, let's plan on doing it again. Cool. Well,
okay.
Everyone, we've been speaking here with Chip Diggins, my awesome cousin from Boulder, Colorado. Thank you so much, Chip. This has been awesome to reconnect with you personally, but also thank you for sharing your story with the community, for sure with the atheist community, but hopefully with some people that are on the fence, just trying to figure out what's reality and try to figure out how to go from where they are to a better understanding of the world. And so thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate it. Your voice in this is awesome, and hope it gets bigger and bigger.
Same to you as well, because I think I care, and I want to see you succeed so much, and I'm happy to see that you found something that you're really, really passionate about. And this community of the atheist community is very open and very loving, and I think there's a lot of people that would love to hear your voice and what you have to say. And I know I still want to hear more of what you have to say, because I don't have your whole story necessarily. So I would love to hear that too. And
thank you.
I hope to hear that more throughout as you do this.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. I've got a lot of ideas coming. So hopefully as more time allows, I'll definitely be able to put more out there. But yeah, I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to hopefully being more of an influence than I am now, and hopefully helping a lot of people to get just to get free. To put it at the base level, this is about freedom. People are not free. They're stuck in a cult. Christianity, and any version of it, is a cult. And I love helping people get free. So yeah, hopefully my passion will, and my imagination that we talked about, hopefully some things will just work out to the point where the platform does get bigger, and that people just really get the fairness issue of saying, like, if you're going to really believe in this stuff, let me tell you everything you need to know about it. You need to know what they said to a Bible college, at Sunday school, but you also need to know about, where it came from, the Greek mythology and all this. And it's a fairness issue to me. It's not fair to tell people to believe in this stuff and not tell them where it came from. And I'm excited. I've got so many ideas. So hopefully someone will come to fruition soon.
Nice.
So, well, thank you again, Chip. This is really good. I really appreciate it. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.